The taxi driver looked at me through the mirror and said, "Ma'am, I'm not supposed to do this, but you need to get out, now." I asked what he meant. He nervously pointed at the GPS. "Someone else is controlling your route." But I refused to leave. And when we arrived at the destination, I trembled at who was waiting for me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The taxi driver's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. Pure, unfiltered fear. "Ma'am, I'm not supposed to do this, but get out. Now." I leaned forward, gripping the back of his seat. "What are you talking about? We're almost there." His hands trembled on the steering wheel. "Look at this." He pointed at the GPS mounted on his dashboard. The route displayed on the screen showed a path I hadn't requested, zigzagging through streets I'd never mentioned. "Someone else is controlling your route. This isn't the address you gave me." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "Keep driving. I need to see where this leads." "Lady, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." And I did. After 3 weeks of mysterious phone calls, documents appearing and disappearing from my late husband's study, and the growing certainty that someone in my own family was hiding something catastrophic, this detour was just another piece of a puzzle I was determined to solve. "Please, just drive." The driver's jaw clenched, but he continued. We wound through the outskirts of Pine Ridge, Vermont, past the familiar landmarks of the town where I'd lived for 43 years. My name is Marie Hines. I'm 67 years old, a widow of 8 months, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew everything about my life, my family, and my late husband Alexander's affairs. I was wrong about all of it. The GPS directed us away from the main roads, toward the old industrial district that had been slowly decaying since the textile mill closed in the 90s. Abandoned warehouses loomed like tombstones against the gray November sky. The taxi pulled up in front of a building I recognized immediately, the old Hines storage facility, a property Alexander had inherited from his father, but claimed he'd sold 15 years ago. "This is it," the driver said. "Ma'am, please reconsider." I handed him a $50 bill. "Thank you. You've been more helpful than you know." As I stepped out, the cold air bit through my wool coat. The facility looked abandoned, its windows dark, weeds pushing through cracks in the parking lot. But there was a car parked near the entrance. A silver Mercedes that I'd seen in my own driveway countless times. My daughter-in-law Victoria's car. My legs felt unsteady as I approached the building's entrance. The door was unlocked. Inside, the smell of dust and old paper filled my nostrils. Emergency lighting cast long shadows down a corridor lined with storage units. My footsteps echoed as I walked deeper into the building, following the sound of voices coming from somewhere ahead. "Can't keep doing this. She's asking questions." Victoria's voice, sharp with anxiety. "Mother doesn't know anything. She's been a housewife her entire life. Alexander kept her in the dark about everything." My son Trevor's voice, dismissive in a way that made my chest tighten. I pressed myself against the wall, listening. "Your father kept meticulous records." A third voice, male, unfamiliar. "If she finds the safety deposit box key, everything unravels." The safety deposit box key. My hand instinctively went to my coat pocket, where the small brass key had been residing since I'd found it 3 weeks ago, hidden inside a hollowed-out book in Alexander's study, a copy of Paradise Lost that he'd told me never to touch because it had sentimental value. After he died, grief had made me reckless. I'd opened it anyway. "We need to move the documents tonight," the unfamiliar voice continued. "The will reading is in 2 days. Once she hears what's in it, she'll start digging. We can't let her access what Alexander left behind." "The will?" Trevor laughed, but it was bitter, hollow. "Mother thinks she's inheriting the house and Dad's pension. She has no idea about the properties, the offshore accounts, or the partnerships." My world tilted. Properties? Offshore accounts? Alexander had been a civil engineer for the county. We'd lived modestly, or so I'd thought. Every financial decision, every investment, every bank statement, Alexander had handled it all. "You focus on raising our family," he'd always said. "I'll take care of the money." "Your mother's a fool," Victoria said. The cruelty in her tone was like a slap. She'll sign whatever we put in front of her. The problem is Ronnie. Trevor again. If he talks to her, Ronnie won't be a problem much longer. I've taken care of it. The unfamiliar voice was cold, matter of fact. Ronnie was my younger son, the one who'd been asking me odd questions over the past few weeks, the one who'd been distant at Alexander's funeral, the one who'd sent me a cryptic text message 2 days ago. Mom, trust no one, especially not T or V. Check Dad's book collection. What did you do? Trevor's voice rose slightly. Nothing permanent. Just ensured he'll be occupied for the next 72 hours. By the time he resurfaces, the estate will be settled, and Mother will have signed everything over. I had to grip the wall to keep from falling. My own son, my own family, plotting against me like I was nothing more than an obstacle to be managed. The betrayal cut deeper than Alexander's death had, deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. We should go, Victoria said. I need to get back before she notices I'm gone. I told her I was at the garden club meeting. Footsteps approached. I looked around frantically, spotting a door marked Storage Manager's Office, slightly ajar. I slipped inside, pressing myself against the wall as they passed. Through the crack in the door, I glimpsed them. Trevor, tall and broad-shouldered like his father, his face hard with determination. Victoria, elegant even in casual clothes, her expression coldly calculating. And a man I'd never seen before, wearing an expensive suit, carrying a briefcase. Tomorrow we'll need her signature on the preliminary documents, the stranger said. Tell her it's standard probate paperwork. She won't read it carefully. And if she does? Trevor asked. Then we'll have to pursue other options. But I don't think it will come to that. Your mother has always been compliant. They left. I waited until I heard the exterior door close, until the Mercedes's engine faded into the distance. Then I emerged, my mind racing. The storage facility stretched before me, rows upon rows of units. If Alexander had kept records here, if there were documents that would explain what was happening, they could be anywhere. But I didn't have time to search now. I needed to think, to plan, to understand the scope of what I was facing. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I thought I could still trust. My sister Helen, who lived 2 hours away in Burlington. She answered on the second ring. Margaret, what's wrong? You sound terrible. Helen, I need your help. Something's happened. Something I don't fully understand yet. Can I come stay with you for a few days? Of course. Are you all right? Is it about Alexander? It's about everything. I'll explain when I see you. I'm leaving tonight. As I hung up, I noticed something on the floor near where Trevor and Victoria had been standing. A business card. I picked it up, my hands shaking. Lawrence Pemberton, attorney at law, specializing in estate planning and asset protection. I pocketed the card and the key, then made my way back outside. The taxi was gone, but I could call another. As I waited, standing in the cold parking lot of a building my husband had supposedly sold, I realized with crystalline clarity that everything I'd believed about my life had been a carefully constructed lie. Alexander hadn't just handled our finances. He'd built an empire I knew nothing about. And now my eldest son and his wife were trying to steal it out from under me, treating me like a senile old woman too stupid to notice what was happening. They were wrong about that. A new taxi pulled up, and I climbed inside. Burlington, please. As we pulled away, I saw another car parked across the street, one I hadn't noticed before. A dark sedan with tinted windows. The headlights flicked on as we passed. Ma'am, the driver said, I think someone's following us. I turned to look, my pulse quickening. I know. Should I keep driving? Normal speed. Don't let them know we've noticed. Because if there was one thing I'd learned in the past hour, it was this. The people trying to destroy me thought I was weak, ignorant, easily manipulated. Let them think that. Let them believe their own lies about who I was and what I was capable of. While they underestimated me, I would be gathering my strength, uncovering their secrets, and preparing for a battle they didn't even know had begun. The war for my life, my legacy, and the truth about Alexander Hines had just started, and I intended to win. Helen's apartment smelled like cinnamon tea and old books, a combination that had always meant safety to me. But as I sat at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning, watching the street below for any sign of the dark sedan, I realized safety was an illusion I could no longer afford. "They followed you all the way here?" Helen asked, setting a steaming mug in front of me. At 70, my sister was sharper than most people half her age, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes missing nothing. Until about 20 miles outside Burlington. Then they turned off. I wrapped my hands around the mug, trying to stop them from shaking. Or they wanted me to think they turned off. Helen sat across from me, her expression grave. "Tell me everything." So I did. The key in Alexander's book. The mysterious changes in our bank statements that I'd started noticing after his death. Small discrepancies that had seemed like accounting errors until they formed a pattern. The overheard conversation at the storage facility. The lawyer's business card now burning a hole in my pocket. When I finished, Helen was quiet for a long moment. "Alexander always was secretive about money. I told you that when you married him. You also said he was stable and reliable. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." She drummed her fingers on the table. "What are you going to do? Find out what's in that safety deposit box. Then figure out exactly what Alexander left behind and why Trevor thinks he can take it from me." "And Ronnie?" My chest tightened. I tried calling him from the taxi. Straight to voicemail. I've sent 6 messages. Nothing. That's not like him. No, it wasn't. Ronnie had always been the attentive one, calling every Sunday, visiting twice a month, actually seeming to care about my life beyond what I could do for him. Unlike Trevor, who only appeared when he wanted something, usually with Victoria whispering poison in his ear. Helen stood. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll go to the bank together. Safety in numbers." But sleep wouldn't come. I lay in Helen's guest room, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying Trevor's words. "Mother doesn't know anything. She's been a housewife her entire life." He was right, in a way. I'd dedicated 43 years to raising children, managing a home, supporting Alexander's career, hosting dinner parties for his colleagues, keeping everything running smoothly while he built his empire in secret. I'd been content with that role, or thought I had been. Now I saw it for what it was. A cage disguised as comfort. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop looking. For your own safety. This is your only warning." I took a screenshot, then blocked the number. Let them threaten. Let them think I could be scared into submission. Morning came gray and cold. Helen drove us to Pine Ridge in her ancient Volvo, taking back roads, her eyes constantly checking the mirrors. "No one's following us," she said, but she didn't sound entirely convinced. First National Bank sat on Main Street, its granite facade unchanged since the 1960s. Inside, the warmth was oppressive after the November chill. I approached the customer service desk, where a young woman with a name tag reading Bethany greeted me with a professional smile. "I need to access my late husband's safety deposit box," I said, producing the key and Alexander's death certificate, which I'd had the foresight to bring. Bethany's smile faltered. "Of course. Let me pull up the account. Name? Alexander James Hines." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Then she frowned. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hines, but there's been a hold placed on this box." Ice flooded my veins. What kind of hold? It says here that due to ongoing estate proceedings, access is restricted pending probate clearance. She looked genuinely apologetic. "Your attorney should have informed you." "I don't have an attorney." But Trevor did. Or rather, Lawrence Pemberton. "Who placed this hold?" "I'm not authorized to share that information. But if you'd like to speak with our manager..." "Yes, immediately." Bethany disappeared into the back. Helen gripped my arm. "They're blocking you." "I can see that." The manager emerged 5 minutes later, a balding man in his 50s who introduced himself as Gerald Morrison. His handshake was firm, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Hines, I understand there's been some confusion about your husband's safety deposit box." "No confusion. I have the key and the legal right to access my deceased husband's property. Under normal circumstances, yes. However, a petition was filed yesterday afternoon claiming that certain assets may be subject to business partnership agreements that supersede standard inheritance laws. Until the court reviews the claim, we're legally obligated to restrict access. Who filed this petition? Morrison hesitated. I believe it was submitted by Pemberton and Associates on behalf of... He consulted a document. Whitmore Industrial Holdings, LLC. A company I'd never heard of. A company that apparently had more rights to my husband's belongings than I did. This is ridiculous. I'm his widow. We were married for 43 years. I sympathize, Mrs. Hines, truly. But my hands are tied. If you want to contest this, you'll need to file a counterpetition with the probate court. Helen pulled me toward the exit before I could say something I'd regret. Outside, the cold air was a relief after the suffocating warmth of the bank. They anticipated this, I said, my voice shaking with rage. They knew I'd find the key. They knew I'd come here. They've been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Probably since before Alexander even died. Then we need to think like they do, Helen said. Where else would Alexander have kept important documents? The storage facility. But they're moving everything tonight, remember? And I can't exactly walk in there and demand access. No, but you know who can? Helen's eyes gleamed. The fire department. If there were a small electrical fire, say around 9 tonight when the building's empty, they'd have to evacuate everything, document everything for the insurance claim. I stared at my sister. You're suggesting we commit arson? I'm suggesting that sometimes old buildings with faulty wiring have unfortunate accidents. I'm also suggesting that my friend Dorothy's son is a fire inspector and might be persuaded to be very thorough in his investigation if he knew there were important documents at risk. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Trevor. Mother, where are you? I've been calling the house all morning. I forced my voice to remain calm, pleasant. The obedient mother he expected. I'm visiting Helen for a few days, dear. I needed a change of scenery. Without telling anyone? Suspicion sharpened his tone. Victoria tried to stop by this morning. She was worried. Worried I was catching on to their scheme, more like. I left a note on the counter. Perhaps she didn't see it. When are you coming back? We have the preliminary probate meeting tomorrow afternoon. You need to be there. Of course. What time? 2:00. Pemberton's office. He paused. Mother, you should know that Dad's estate is complicated. There are going to be some surprises. Some things he never told you about. Such as? It's better if we discuss it tomorrow. With the lawyer present. To answer your questions properly. To manipulate me properly, he meant. To present their carefully crafted lies while I sat there, the confused widow, signing away my life. I'll be there, I said. Good. And Mother? Don't worry about anything. Victoria and I will take care of everything. You don't need to trouble yourself with the details. I ended the call before I said something that would reveal my hand. Helen was watching me with knowing eyes. The meeting's tomorrow, I said. We have tonight to figure out what we're up against. We spent the afternoon in Helen's apartment researching. She had a friend at the county clerk's office who owed her a favor. By 4:00, we had copies of property records showing that Alexander had owned not just the storage facility, but 6 commercial properties in Pine Ridge, 3 in Burlington, and a stake in a shopping complex in Montpelier. Total estimated value, somewhere north of $15 million. $15 million. While I'd been clipping coupons and shopping for bargains, my husband had been sitting on a fortune. There's more, Helen said, pointing at her computer screen. Whitmore Industrial Holdings, LLC. It was formed 8 years ago. 3 partners, Alexander, Trevor, and someone named David Castellano, the man from the storage facility, the one in the expensive suit. Castellano owns a development company, Helen continued. They've been buying up property all over Vermont. There are pending deals worth another $20 million. My hands were shaking again. Alexander brought Trevor into this 8 years ago. Ronnie was still in graduate school then, struggling to pay tuition. Trevor was already established, already married to Victoria. Alexander chose him as the heir apparent and never said a word to me. Or to Ronnie. That's why Ronnie was acting strange. He must have found out somehow. My phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Margaret, I'm concerned about you leaving town without notice. Are you feeling well? Sometimes grief can affect our judgment. Please call me. The condescension dripped through every word. She was setting up a narrative. The elderly widow, mentally unstable, unable to manage her own affairs. It would make it easier to challenge anything I tried to do. Easier to paint me as incompetent if I fought back. "We need to find Ronnie," I said. "If they've done something to him." "One crisis at a time," Helen interrupted. "First, we arm you with information. Tomorrow, you walk into that meeting knowing exactly what they're trying to hide. You make them think you're still in the dark, but you document everything. Record the meeting if you can. And tonight? Tonight, we visit the storage facility. No fires necessary. I have a better idea." At 8:30 that evening, Helen and I stood outside the Heinz storage facility. The building was dark, as expected, but Helen hadn't come empty-handed. From her purse, she produced a set of lockpicks. "When did you learn to do that?" I asked, stunned. "You think I spent 40 years as a librarian without learning a few useful skills? People underestimate what librarians know how to do." She had the door open in under 2 minutes. We slipped inside, using our phone flashlights to navigate. The storage units stretched before us, numbered and locked. But Helen was examining the building directory mounted on the wall. "Unit 217, she said. "That's the manager's master unit. It'll have records of who rents what." We found it on the second floor. This lock took Helen longer to pick, but eventually it yielded. Inside were filing cabinets, old desk, and a computer covered in dust. Helen booted up the computer while I rifled through the files. "Margaret," Helen's voice was tight. "You need to see this." I moved behind her, looking at the screen. Email correspondence between Alexander and Castellano, going back years. Plans to expand the business. Mentions of managing Margaret's expectations and keeping her away from the financial details. Discussion of how to structure the estate to minimize my inheritance rights. "They've been planning this since before he got sick," I whispered. Alexander knew he was dying. He had months to tell me the truth. Instead, he spent that time plotting with Trevor to shut me out. "There's more." Helen clicked to another folder. "Look at this email from 6 weeks ago. From Trevor to Castellano." I read it, my vision blurring with rage. "Pemberton confirms that if we can establish business debt exceeding the estate's liquid assets, the properties will have to be sold to cover obligations. Mother's homestead exemption protects the house, but everything else becomes fair game. Once she signs the probate documents, we'll have 60 days before she can challenge. By then, we'll have transferred everything to our holding company. She'll get the house and a small settlement. We'll get everything else." "They're going to bankrupt the estate on paper," Helen breathed, "leaving you with nothing but the house." And Trevor knew I'd fight to keep the house. The home where I'd raised my children, where Alexander and I had built our life. He was counting on my sentimentality, my attachment to that property. While I clung to the past, he'd steal the future. "Download everything," I said. "Every file, every email. We need copies." Helen worked quickly, transferring files to a thumb drive. I continued searching the physical files, pulling out rental agreements, property records, partnership documents. Then I found it. A folder labeled Insurance Policies. Inside were life insurance documents. 5 policies, totaling $8 million. All with Trevor listed as the sole beneficiary. Not me. Trevor. Alexander had taken out $8 million in life insurance and left it all to our son, while arranging the estate to minimize what I'd inherit. He'd spent 43 years pretending to love me while planning to leave me with scraps. "We have to go," Helen said suddenly. "I hear something." Headlights swept across the building. A car in the parking lot. Then voices. Trevor and Castellano, right on schedule to move the documents. We ran, clutching our stolen evidence, racing down the back stairs. Behind us, I heard the front door open, heard Trevor's voice echoing through the building. "Check upstairs first. Make sure everything's still secure." We burst through the rear exit into the alley behind the facility. Helen's Volvo was parked 2 blocks away. We ran, 2 older women fleeing through the November night, carrying secrets that could destroy a family. As we reached the car, I looked back. Trevor stood in the lit doorway of the storage facility, his phone to his ear, his head turning as if sensing our presence. He couldn't see us in the darkness. But somehow, I knew he knew. The game had changed. Tomorrow I'd walk into his trap armed with knowledge he didn't know I possessed. But tonight, I'd learned the cruelest truth of all. The man I'd loved for 43 years had never trusted me with anything that mattered. And my son was exactly like him. The probate meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock. I arrived at Pemberton and Associates at 1:30, dressed in the navy suit I'd worn to Alexander's funeral, my hair carefully styled, my expression carefully blank. The grieving widow, overwhelmed and dependent. Exactly what they expected to see. Helen had wanted to come with me, but I'd refused. They need to think I'm alone, I'd told her. Vulnerable. What I didn't tell her was that I had the thumb drive in my purse, along with a digital recorder disguised as a pen, and that I'd spent the morning memorizing every detail of the files we'd stolen. I wasn't alone. I was armed. The law office occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated Victorian building. Inside, everything screamed expensive discretion. Mahogany furniture, leather-bound books, oil paintings of stern-faced judges. A receptionist with perfect teeth directed me to a conference room where Trevor and Victoria already waited. Trevor stood when I entered, his expression carefully concerned. "Mother, you look tired. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough." I took the seat across from him, noticing how Victoria's hand rested possessively on his arm. She wore pearls and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her smile was saccharine. "Margaret, we were so worried when you left without telling anyone. If you'd needed space, you could have just asked." "I'm fine, Victoria. Thank you." Lawrence Pemberton entered then, his suit even more expensive than the one he'd worn at the storage facility. He didn't recognize me from that night. I'd been just a shadow in the darkness. Now I was the elderly client, someone to be managed and manipulated. "Mrs. Hines." His handshake was firm, professional. "My condolences on your loss. I know this process can be overwhelming, but I assure you we'll make it as painless as possible." He sat at the head of the table, spreading documents before him like a general deploying troops. "As you know, your husband's estate is quite complex, much more so than most people realize. Alexander was an astute businessman. So I'm learning." Something flickered in Pemberton's eyes. Wariness, perhaps, but it passed quickly. "Yes. Well, let's begin with the basics. The primary residence at 47 Maple Street is held jointly in your name, so that passes to you automatically. However, Alexander's business interests are substantial." He slid a document across the table. "This is an inventory of assets. As you'll see, there are multiple commercial properties, partnership interests, and investment accounts." I picked up the document, scanning it carefully. The properties were all listed, but the valuations were significantly lower than what Helen and I had found. The shopping complex in Montpellier that public records valued at $4 million was listed here at $1.8 million. "These numbers seem low," I said quietly. Pemberton's smile was patronizing. "Property values can be complicated, Mrs. Hines. These are the assessed values for tax purposes, but not market values." The smile faltered. "I'm sorry? Tax assessments are typically lower than actual market value, sometimes significantly lower. I may have been a housewife, Mr. Pemberton, but I'm not stupid." Trevor leaned forward. "Mother, no one's saying you're stupid, but these are complex financial matters. Dad would have wanted us to help you understand. Your father never wanted me to understand anything. That's becoming quite clear." Silence fell over the room. Victoria's fingers tightened on Trevor's arm. Pemberton cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hines, I understand you're grieving. Grief can make us say things. I'm not grieving anymore, Mr. Pemberton. I'm paying attention." I pulled out my own document, one I'd printed that morning from the files Helen had downloaded. According to county records, the shopping complex alone is worth $4.2 million. The industrial properties total another $8 million. The storage facility, which my husband supposedly sold 15 years ago, is worth $2 million. Trevor's face had gone pale. "Where did you get that?" "Public records. Available to anyone who cares to look." Pemberton recovered quickly. "Mrs. Hines, property ownership and valuation are complicated issues. The storage facility, for instance, is held by a business partnership with significant debts attached. That's why we've assessed it lower. Whitmore Industrial Holdings, LLC. I know. 3 partners. Alexander, Trevor, and David Castellano. I looked directly at my son. When were you planning to tell me you've been your father's business partner for 8 years? Trevor's jaw clenched. Victoria's eyes had gone hard, calculating. The mask was slipping. Mother, Dad brought me in to help manage things. He was getting older. His health was failing. His health was fine 8 years ago. He didn't get sick until 2 years ago. I pulled out another document. But he did form this LLC 3 months after Ronnie asked him for a loan to finish graduate school. A loan Alexander refused, claiming we couldn't afford it, while sitting on millions in property. Ronnie was irresponsible with money, Trevor snapped. Dad didn't want to enable. Ronnie was your brother, and Alexander was our father, who apparently decided you deserved an empire while Ronnie deserved nothing. My voice cracked despite my efforts to control it. While I deserved to be kept in the dark like a child. Pemberton held up his hands. Perhaps we should take a break. Emotions are running high. No, we're going to finish this. I pulled out the final document, the one that had kept me awake all night. Life insurance policies. 5 of them. Total value, $8 million. Beneficiary, Trevor James Hines. Trevor's face drained of color completely now. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. Pemberton's professional composure cracked. How did you... Trevor started. How did I find out? Because unlike all of you, I actually started looking at what my husband was hiding. I stood, my hands shaking but my voice steady. 43 years of marriage. I raised your children, Trevor. I supported Alexander's career. I ran our household, hosted his colleagues, played the perfect wife. And he repaid me by cutting me out of everything that mattered, by setting up this elaborate scheme to leave me with scraps while his favorite son inherited millions. That's not fair, Trevor said, his voice rising. I worked with Dad. I helped build those businesses. You were just what? Just his wife? Just your mother? I leaned forward. What exactly did you do, Trevor, that entitled you to $8 million in insurance money while I get nothing? What work did you put in that I didn't? You wouldn't understand the business decisions. Try me. Pemberton stood abruptly. Mrs. Hines, I think it's best if we reschedule this meeting. Clearly, you need time to process. I'm not processing anything. I'm asking questions that deserve answers. For instance, why does your petition claim the estate has significant business debts when the LLC's tax returns show consistent profitability? Why are you trying to force a sale of the properties at undervalued prices? And who exactly benefits when those properties are transferred to your holding company at a fraction of their worth? The silence was deafening. I'd shown my hand, revealed that I knew far more than they'd anticipated. But I'd had to. They were hours away from putting documents in front of me, from pressuring me into signing away my rights while pretending it was standard procedure. You've been going through Alexander's private papers, Pemberton said finally, his voice cold now, the professional mask completely abandoned. Papers that are subject to attorney-client privilege, papers that belong to his estate, of which I am the widow and a primary beneficiary. I gathered my purse. I'm not signing anything today. In fact, I'm retaining my own attorney, and I'm requesting a full forensic audit of Hines Industrial Holdings and all associated accounts. Mother, you're making a mistake, Trevor said, standing. There was a threat in his voice now, barely veiled. Dad set things up this way for a reason. If you fight this, you'll lose. You'll spend everything on legal fees and end up with nothing. Or perhaps I'll discover exactly how much you and your father stole from me over the years. Victoria finally spoke, her voice dripping venom. You ungrateful witch. After everything Trevor's done for you. All the times he's dropped everything to help you, all the support. Support? I laughed, bitter and sharp. Is that what we're calling it? Dropping by once a month to make sure I wasn't asking too many questions? Making sure the confused widow stayed confused? Trevor grabbed my arm as I moved toward the door. His grip was tight, painful. You need to think very carefully about what you're doing. Dad wanted this handled quietly within the family. But if you bring in lawyers, if you make this public, There are things that might come out. Things you won't want to know. Let go of me. Things about Dad. About his business dealings. About where some of that money came from. His voice dropped to a whisper. About Ronnie. My blood ran cold. What about Ronnie? Ask yourself why he's not here. Why he's not answering your calls. Trevor released my arm. Maybe he knows something you don't. Maybe he's staying away for a reason. I stared at my eldest son, seeing a stranger. What did you do to him? Nothing. Yet. But if you insist on tearing this family apart, if you force us to defend ourselves, he shrugged. Accidents happen, especially to people who stick their noses where they don't belong. The threat was explicit now. Crystal clear. My son was threatening his own brother. Threatening me. You're just like him, I whispered. Just like Alexander. You learned well. I left the conference room, walked past the receptionist with her perfect teeth, took the elevator down to the street. Only when I was outside, only when the November air hit my face, did I allow myself to shake. Trevor had threatened Ronnie. Whether he'd already done something to him or was planning to, I couldn't be sure. But the message was clear. Back off, or your younger son pays the price. I called Helen from the car. I need you to do something. I need you to find Ronnie. Today. Now. What happened? Trevor's threatening him. I don't know if it's just talk, but I can't take that risk. Please, Helen. He's my son. I'll make some calls. Where are you going? To the police, to report threats and harassment. Margaret, wait. Think about this. If you go to the police without proof, if Trevor claims you're an unstable widow making wild accusations, I have the recording, which you made without his knowledge or consent. In Vermont, that might be illegal. They could use it against you, claim you're the one acting inappropriately. She was right. I knew she was right. But I felt trapped, suffocated by the web of lies and manipulation closing around me. Then what do? You come back here. We regroup. We find Ronnie first, make sure he's safe. Then we plan our next move carefully. No more rushing in. I drove back to Burlington, my mind racing. Trevor's threat echoed in my head. There are things about Dad you won't want to know. What things? What had Alexander been involved in that his own son could use as blackmail? I was beginning to realize that the man I'd married, the man I'd mourned, was someone I'd never actually known at all. Every memory felt tainted now. Every moment of our life together shadowed by secrets and lies. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Your house. Tonight. 10 p.m. Come alone, or Ronnie suffers. Tell no one. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the phone. This was it. The escalation I'd feared. They had Ronnie, or they were using him as bait. Either way, I had no choice but to walk into whatever trap they'd prepared. Because he was my son, my baby boy, and I would burn the world down before I let them hurt him. Even if the world I had to burn was the one Alexander had built. Even if it meant facing truths I'd spent 43 years avoiding. I didn't tell Helen about the text message. Instead, I sat in her living room that evening, pretending to review the documents we'd collected, watching the clock tick toward 10. At 9:30, I excused myself to bed. At 9:40, I slipped out through the back door and drove toward Pine Ridge in Helen's Volvo, leaving my phone on her kitchen counter so she couldn't track me. The house at 47 Maple Street looked exactly as I'd left it 3 days ago. White clapboard siding, black shutters, the porch swing Alexander had installed 20 years ago still swaying slightly in the November wind. Home. Except it had never really been home, had it? Just another pretty lie in a life built on deception. A single light burned in the living room window. My hand shook as I turned the key in the lock. The door swung open silently. Hello, Margaret? I jumped, my heart hammering. David Castellano sat in Alexander's favorite armchair, the leather one I'd never been able to bring myself to sit in after he died. Now this stranger occupied it like a throne. Where's Ronnie? I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. Safe. For now. Castellano gestured to the sofa. Sit. We need to talk. I'm not doing anything until I know my son is alive. Castellano pulled out his phone, swiped, then held it up. A video played. Ronnie, tied to a chair in what looked like a basement, gagged but clearly breathing. His eyes were wide with fear, and there was a bruise darkening his left cheek. Rage and terror warred in my chest. If you hurt him, that depends entirely on you. Castellano pocketed the phone. Sit down, Margaret, please. I sat, my purse clutched in my lap, my mind racing through options. The recording pen was still inside, activated. Whatever happened tonight, there would be evidence. Your husband was a brilliant man, Castellano began. Visionary, really. He saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. The storage facility was just the beginning. Over 20 years we built an empire together. By lying to me. By protecting you. Castellano's voice was patient, almost gentle. It made my skin crawl. Alexander loved you in his way, but he knew you wouldn't understand the business, the risks we had to take. He wanted you to have security, stability, a nice home, a comfortable life, while he played games with millions. It wasn't a game. It was survival, building something from nothing, making choices that weren't always— He paused, choosing his words carefully. Conventional. A chill ran down my spine. What kind of choices? The kind that made all of this possible. He gestured around the room. This house, your son's educations, the comfortable retirement Alexander planned for you. None of it came from his county salary. Where did it come from? Castellano studied me for a long moment. You really don't know, do you? Alexander kept you even more isolated than I thought. Tell me. The properties we acquired weren't always purchased through standard channels. Sometimes sellers needed incentive to accept our offers. Sometimes zoning boards needed persuasion to approve our permits. Sometimes inspectors needed to overlook certain irregularities during construction. The implications crashed over me like ice water. You're talking about bribes, extortion, criminal activity. I'm talking about business in the real world. Alexander understood that success requires flexibility, pragmatism. He did what was necessary. And Trevor? Does he do what's necessary too? Trevor learned from the best. He's proven quite adept at managing the more delicate aspects of our operations. Castellano leaned forward. Which brings us to why you're here. Your interference at the probate meeting was unfortunate. You revealed how much you've learned. That creates problems. Problems you plan to solve by threatening Ronnie. Ronnie created his own problems. 3 months ago, he started asking questions about Alexander's finances. Questions about property transfers. About money moving through offshore accounts. He even contacted the state attorney general's office, claiming he suspected financial impropriety in county construction contracts. My stomach dropped. Ronnie was investigating you. Ronnie was investigating his own father, and by extension, his brother. Did you know he'd been working with a forensic accountant? They'd traced nearly $2 million in suspicious transactions over the past 5 years. County contracts awarded to companies we secretly controlled. Payments disguised as consulting fees. A very sophisticated scheme that could unravel everything if exposed. That's why he disappeared. You took him. We convinced him to take a voluntary vacation while we sorted things out. But then you started poking around, following in his footsteps. Now we have 2 problems instead of 1. The front door opened. Trevor walked in, followed by Victoria. My son looked haggard, older than his 40 years. Victoria's expression was cold, calculating. Mother. Trevor's voice was flat. I told you not to push this. You kidnapped your own brother. We protected our interests. Ronnie was going to destroy everything Dad built, everything we've worked for. Everything you stole, you mean? Trevor's jaw clenched. You don't understand what's at stake. If Ronnie's investigation goes forward, if the state starts digging, they'll find things. Not just about the business deals, but about Dad. About contracts he influenced, inspectors he paid off, officials he compromised. His entire legacy will be destroyed. He'll be remembered as a criminal. Maybe that's what he was. The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. Pain exploded across my cheek. I staggered back, tasting blood. Trevor! Even Victoria looked shocked. But Trevor's face was contorted with fury. You don't get to judge him. You lived off his money, enjoyed the life he built, never questioned where any of it came from. You were happy to be ignorant as long as the bills got paid. He was right. The truth of it burned worse than the slap. I had been willfully blind, content to let Alexander handle everything, never pushing when he deflected my questions about finances. I'd accepted my role as the sheltered wife, the one protected from harsh realities. And now I was paying the price for that comfortable ignorance. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Castellano pulled out a document. A simple signature. "This transfers all estate assets to a trust controlled by Trevor and myself. You retain the house and a monthly stipend, $50,000 a year, quite generous, but relinquish all claims to the properties, the business interests, and the insurance money. And if I refuse, then Ronnie's investigation materials find their way to the state attorney general. All of them, including the parts that implicate you." "Me? I didn't know anything about—" "Doesn't matter. Your name is on joint tax returns that reported false income. You're listed as an officer of several LLCs you claim to know nothing about." Alexander was thorough in spreading the exposure. "If this investigation moves forward, you'll face criminal charges along with everyone else." It was brilliant, really. Evil, but brilliant. Alexander had used me as a shield, putting my name on documents I'd signed without reading, making me complicit in crimes I'd never known existed. If the empire fell, I'd fall with it. "And Ronnie?" I asked. "Ronnie will be released once you sign. He'll be encouraged to drop his investigation. If he refuses—" Castellano shrugged. "Well, people have accidents, particularly people with a history of depression and financial problems. A suicide wouldn't surprise anyone. Ronnie doesn't have a history of depression. He does now. Hospital admission 2 weeks ago for a psychiatric evaluation. Prescription for antidepressants. A note found in his apartment expressing despair over his financial situation and strained family relationships. All very well documented. They'd been planning this for weeks, months maybe, building a case, creating a narrative, preparing to eliminate anyone who threatened their operation. And Ronnie, my sweet, honest, principled Ronnie, had walked right into their trap by trying to do the right thing. Just like I was doing now. "I need to see him," I said. "I need to know he's really alive before I sign anything." Trevor and Castellano exchanged glances. Victoria spoke for the first time. "That's not possible. He's being held at a secure location. Once you sign, then I don't sign. You can have your lawyer forge my signature for all I care. But I'm not putting my name on anything until I see my son alive and unharmed." The silence stretched. Finally, Castellano nodded. "Very well. Trevor, bring her." Trevor grabbed my arm, hauling me to my feet. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Story of my life, apparently. He dragged me through the house. My house, the one I'd lived in for 43 years, toward the basement door. I'd always hated the basement. Alexander had kept it locked, claiming it was just storage, nothing I needed to worry about. Now I understood why. The stairs descended into darkness. Trevor flipped a switch, and fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing a finished basement I'd never seen before. Not storage at all, but an office. Filing cabinets lined one wall. A massive desk held multiple computers, and on the far wall, a door marked Archives. "Dad did most of his real work down here," Trevor said. "While you were upstairs cooking dinner and watching television, he was building an empire." He opened the Archives door. Inside was a small room, and there, handcuffed to a pipe, was Ronnie. "Mom?" His voice cracked. The gag had been removed, but his face was pale, his eyes hollow with fear. "Mom, don't sign anything. They're lying about—" Trevor backhanded him across the face. Ronnie's head snapped to the side, blood spraying from his nose. "Stop!" I lunged forward, but Castellano caught my arm, holding me back. "The document, Margaret," Castellano said calmly. "Sign it, and this ends. Refuse, and you'll watch your son die slowly and painfully before we kill you too. Those are your options." I looked at Ronnie, at his battered face, at the terror in his eyes. My baby boy, the one who'd always tried to do right, who'd chosen principle over profit, honesty over expedience. He'd discovered his father's corruption and tried to stop it, and now he was paying the price. "I'll sign," I said quietly. "Mother, no." Ronnie struggled against his restraints. They'll kill us both anyway. Don't you see? We know too much. They can't let us. Trevor hit him again, harder. Ronnie slumped, semi-conscious. Enough, I said, my voice breaking. Please, no more. I'll sign whatever you want. Castellano released my arm. Upstairs. We'll finalize everything there. As they led me back up the basement stairs, I caught one last glimpse of Ronnie, bleeding and broken in that small room beneath the house where I'd raised him. The house where I'd believed we were safe, where I'd thought love and family meant something. All lies. Everything had been lies. Upstairs, Castellano spread the documents on the dining room table. The same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals as a family, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where Alexander had carved Thanksgiving turkeys and pretended to be a devoted husband and father. Sign here, here, and here. Castellano pointed to marked lines. Initial here. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen. Everything I was signing away, the properties, the money, the business interests, none of it had ever really been mine anyway. It had all been built on corruption and crime, paid for with Alexander's soul, and now demanding mine in return. But Ronnie was alive, for now, and as long as he was alive, there was hope. I signed. Victoria witnessed the signature, her smile triumphant. Trevor looked relieved. Castellano's expression remained neutral, businesslike. Excellent, Castellano said, gathering the documents. Now, about Ronnie. You said you'd let him go. I said he'd be released. Eventually. Once we're certain you'll honor this agreement and maintain your silence. Castellano moved toward the door. Consider him insurance against your cooperation. That wasn't the deal. There is no deal, Margaret. There's only power and those who wield it. Alexander understood that. Trevor understands it. You're only now learning. He paused at the door. One more thing. If you contact the police, if you speak to anyone about what happened tonight, if you make any attempt to interfere with our operations, Ronnie dies. Immediately. Do you understand? I understood perfectly. They owned me now. Completely. The three of them left, taking the signed documents, leaving me alone in the house that had become my prison. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the basement door. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I prayed. Not for salvation. Not for divine intervention. I prayed for the strength to become the woman I should have been all along. One who fought back. Who refused to be a victim. Who would burn every bridge and break every rule to save her son. Because they'd made one critical mistake. They thought signing papers made me powerless. They thought fear made me compliant. They thought a 67-year-old widow was no threat at all. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I gave them exactly what they expected. 3 days of silence, of appearing broken and defeated. I stayed in the house, curtains drawn, ignoring phone calls. When Helen finally showed up, pounding on the door, I told her I'd signed the papers, that it was over, that I just wanted to be left alone to grieve. The lie tasted bitter, but it was necessary, because while they thought I was crumbling, I was planning. The recording pen had captured everything. Castellano's admission of bribery and extortion, Trevor's assault, their threats against Ronnie. But Helen had been right. Illegally recorded conversations weren't enough. Vermont was a one-party consent state, which meant my recording was technically legal, but a good lawyer could still challenge its admissibility. I needed more. I needed to be smarter than they were. I needed to beat them at their own game. On the 4th day, I received a call from Pemberton's office. The estate settlement hearing was scheduled for the following Monday at the county courthouse. A formality, they said, since all parties had agreed to the terms. The judge would simply rubber stamp the arrangement, and everything would be finalized. 5 days. I had 5 days to save my son and expose 40 years of corruption. I started with the one person I knew who understood how to fight dirty, my sister. Helen arrived within an hour of my call, and this time I told her everything. The recording played in her kitchen, Trevor's voice admitting to kidnapping, Castellano confessing to decades of criminal activity. By the end, Helen's face was ashen. They're holding Ronnie in your basement? Were? They moved him the next morning. I heard them while I was pretending to sleep. Castellano said something about the cabin. I pulled out a map I'd been studying. Alexander owned property near Lake Champlain, a hunting cabin he inherited from his father. It's remote, no neighbors for miles. If they're holding Ronnie anywhere, it's there. We need to call the police. And tell them what? That my son is holding his brother hostage based on a recording that might not be admissible? That we're accusing prominent businessmen of crimes we can't fully prove yet? I shook my head. They'll contact Trevor for his side of the story. He'll move Ronnie, or worse. We can't risk it. Then what? We go to the hearing. We let them think they've won. And then we destroy them in open court where everything becomes public record and they can't make it disappear. Helen stared at me. You've changed. No, I've just stopped pretending to be helpless. We spent the next 4 days preparing. Helen's friend at the county clerk's office provided records of every property transaction Alexander had been involved in for the past 20 years. Another friend, a retired IRS investigator, agreed to review the documents I'd copied from the storage facility and provide an expert opinion on the financial irregularities. But the most important call I made was to Ronnie's forensic accountant, a woman named Patricia Reeves who'd been wondering why her client had disappeared mid-investigation. Mrs. Hines? Patricia sounded shocked when I identified myself. Ronnie said you didn't know anything about... I didn't. Now I do. And I need everything Ronnie found. Everything he gave you. All of it. The investigation isn't complete. If Ronnie wants to proceed with formal charges, Ronnie is being held against his will to prevent him from proceeding. If we don't act now, he won't survive to press any charges. Silence. Then, can you come to my office? Today? Patricia's office in Montpelier was small, cluttered with files and computer equipment. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Ronnie came to me 6 months ago, she said, spreading documents across her desk. He'd discovered discrepancies in county construction contracts that his father had oversight on. Contracts worth millions, awarded to shell companies that all traced back to the same ownership group. Whitmore Industrial Holdings. Exactly. But that was just the beginning. As we dug deeper, we found a pattern going back 23 years. Alexander Hines would approve permits and contracts for construction projects. The companies doing the work would bill the county at inflated rates, then kick back a percentage to a series of offshore accounts. The money would be laundered through various business ventures and property purchases, eventually ending up in Alexander's personal holdings. How much are we talking about? Conservative estimate? 35 million over 2 decades, possibly more. The number staggered me. 35 million stolen from taxpayers, from the community Alexander had sworn to serve. And I'd lived off that money, eaten food it purchased, slept in beds it bought, never once questioning where it all came from. But the really interesting part, Patricia continued, is that Ronnie found evidence Alexander was planning to flip. About 3 months before he died, Alexander contacted the state attorney general's office. He was negotiating immunity in exchange for testimony against his partners. I felt the blood drain from my face. Alexander was going to betray Trevor and Castellano? It appears so. We found encrypted emails discussing terms of a deal. Alexander would provide evidence, testify if needed, and in exchange he'd avoid prosecution. He'd have to forfeit most of the assets, but he'd stay out of prison. But he died before he could finalize it. Heart attack. Very convenient timing for his partners. The implication hung in the air between us. You think they killed him? I think it's worth investigating. The doctor who treated Alexander that night was Sebastian Morse. Guess who pays Dr. Morse's malpractice insurance through a subsidiary company? Whitmore Industrial Holdings. Patricia nodded. Everything's connected. Alexander built a system where everyone was compromised. Everyone had something to lose if the truth came out. Including, I'm sorry to say, you. I know. They made sure my name was on enough documents to implicate me if this goes public. Which is why you need a lawyer who specializes in this type of case. Someone who can negotiate immunity for you in exchange for testimony. She pulled out a business card. Diana Sutherland. She's a prosecutor-turned-defense attorney who's handled several major corruption cases. I've already briefed her on the basics. She's expecting your call. Diana Sutherland agreed to meet me that afternoon. She was in her 50s, gray-haired and formidable, with an office that radiated competence and success. "Patricia sent me the preliminary files," she said after we'd settled into her conference room. "This is bigger than you realize. The corruption isn't just Alexander and his partners. It's a network that includes county officials, inspectors, possibly even judges. Can you help me? I can try, but you need to understand what you're facing. These people have resources, connections, and decades of practice making problems disappear. They've already demonstrated they're willing to kidnap and potentially kill to protect themselves. They have my son. I know, which is why we need to move carefully. If we go to the authorities now, before we have overwhelming evidence, they'll circle the wagons. Ronnie will disappear permanently, and you'll find yourself facing charges with no leverage to negotiate. What do you suggest?" Diana leaned forward. "We use the hearing on Monday. It's public, it's on record, and it's the one place they can't control the narrative completely. We let them present their falsified estate settlement. And then we present the truth, all of it, with evidence so overwhelming that the judge has no choice but to order a criminal investigation. They'll run. They'll disappear before the police can act. Not if we time it right. I've already contacted the state attorney general's office. They've agreed to have investigators present at the hearing, ready to act the moment the evidence is presented. We'll have warrants prepared in advance for Trevor, Castellano, Victoria, and several others. The moment you testify, they'll be arrested before they can leave the courthouse." Hope flickered in my chest for the first time in days. "And Ronnie? That's the tricky part. We need to find him before the hearing. If they realize we're moving against them, he becomes a liability they'll eliminate immediately. I think I know where he is. A cabin at Lake Champlain." Diana made a note. "Can you get us the exact location?" "I can try. That night, I did something I'd never done in 43 years of marriage. I broke into Alexander's personal safe. It was hidden behind a painting in his study. A small wall safe I'd always assumed contained important documents and perhaps some cash. The combination was his birthday. Of course it was. Inside, I found exactly what I needed. A folder containing property deeds, including one for a parcel of land at Lake Champlain, with a detailed map showing the cabin's location, access roads, and even the location of a hidden key. But there was something else in the safe. A letter, addressed to me in Alexander's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before his death. My hands shook as I opened it. "Margaret," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I can only hope you've learned the truth without suffering too much for it. You deserved better than what I gave you, better than the lies, the secrets, the life built on corruption. I was a coward. I chose money over integrity, power over principle, and in doing so, I destroyed everything that mattered. Trevor has become everything I feared he would become, and it's my fault. I taught him well. I'm trying to make it right, trying to expose the corruption before it's too late, but I'm running out of time. My heart is failing, not just symbolically, but literally. The doctors give me months at best. If I die before I can complete what I've started, protect Ronnie. He's the only one of us worth saving. He has proof hidden in a storage unit. Unit 142, combination 72968. Use it. Burn it all down if you have to. Just don't let them win. I'm sorry I wasn't the man you deserved. I'm sorry for everything. Alexander." I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Alexander had known. He'd known what he'd created, what he'd done to our family, and he'd tried, at the very end, to make it right. But he'd failed, left me to clean up the mess alone. Unit 142. I'd seen it at the storage facility but hadn't searched it. Ronnie's evidence was there, waiting. Helen and I went that night, armed with Alexander's letter and renewed purpose. The unit was packed with boxes, financial records, recorded conversations, photographs of meetings that should have been private, emails, bank statements. Ronnie had been building a case for months, meticulously documenting everything. And now, we had it all. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. The courthouse steps were slippery with frost as Helen and I climbed them, carrying briefcases full of evidence. Diana Sutherland waited inside, flanked by 2 investigators from the state attorney general's office. They're already in the courtroom, Diana said. Trevor, Victoria, Castellano, Pemberton. The judge is Hamilton Reed. He's clean, thank goodness. One of the few who never took Alexander's money. Are we ready? As ready as we'll ever be. Remember, let them present their case first. Don't react, don't argue. When it's your turn to speak, that's when we drop everything. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled and formal. Trevor sat at one table with Pemberton, both in expensive suits, both radiating confidence. Victoria sat behind them, her expression serene. Castellano stood near the back, arms crossed. They barely glanced at me as I entered. Judge Reed called the hearing to order. This is a routine estate settlement hearing for the estate of Alexander James Hines, deceased. Mr. Pemberton, you may proceed. Pemberton stood, smooth and professional. Your Honor, this is indeed a straightforward matter. The widow, Mrs. Margaret Hines, has agreed to the proposed settlement, which allocates assets according to the decedent's wishes while ensuring her financial security. All parties are in agreement. Mrs. Hines? Judge Reed looked at me. Do you contest this settlement? This was it. The moment everything changed. I stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. I do. Trevor's head snapped around. Castellano straightened. Pemberton's confident expression cracked. I contest it, I continued, my voice growing stronger. Because the settlement is based on fraudulent valuations, concealed assets, and a conspiracy to deprive me of my legal inheritance while covering up decades of criminal activity. Your Honor, Pemberton began. I'm not finished. I pulled out the first document. I have evidence that my late husband, my eldest son, and their business partners engaged in systematic corruption, bribery, and embezzlement of public funds, totaling approximately $35 million over 23 years. The courtroom erupted. Judge Reed banged his gavel. Order! Mrs. Hines, these are serious allegations. I have serious evidence, Your Honor. Recorded confessions, financial records, testimony from a forensic accountant, and documentation provided by my son Ronnie Hines, who is currently being held hostage to prevent him from bringing these crimes to light. Trevor lunged to his feet. She's lying. She's a disturbed woman who can't accept. I have recordings of you admitting to kidnapping Ronnie, I said calmly. I have video of him being held in my basement. I have evidence of your threats, your violence, and your conspiracy to cover up your father's crimes while stealing from me. Diana stood. Your Honor, I'm Diana Sutherland, representing Mrs. Hines. We have extensive documentation supporting these claims. We also have investigators ready to execute warrants for the arrest of Trevor Hines, David Castellano, and several others. Castellano bolted for the door. He didn't make it 3 steps before the investigators blocked his path. Nobody leaves, Judge Reed commanded. Bailiff, secure the exits. Mrs. Hines, Ms. Sutherland, approach the bench. Bring your evidence. The next hour was a blur. Document after document, recording after recording, building an undeniable picture of corruption and conspiracy. Trevor's face went from red to white to gray. Victoria wept quietly. Pemberton frantically scribbled notes, already planning his own defense. Finally, Judge Reed sat back, his expression grim. I'm ordering an immediate criminal investigation. Bailiff, take Mr. Trevor Hines, Mr. David Castellano, and Mr. Lawrence Pemberton into custody pending formal charges. Your Honor, I interrupted. My son Ronnie is still missing. They're holding him at a cabin at Lake Champlain. I provided the address from Alexander's map. He needs immediate rescue. Judge Reed nodded to the investigators, who immediately made calls. Within minutes, state police were dispatched to the cabin. As Trevor was handcuffed, he looked at me with such hatred that I almost took a step back. But I held my ground. You've destroyed everything, he hissed. No, I said quietly. You and your father destroyed everything. I'm just exposing it. As they led him away, I felt something break loose inside me. 43 years of deference, of accepting my place, of believing that staying silent was the same as keeping peace. I was done being silent. The call came 2 hours later. Ronnie was alive. He'd been dehydrated, beaten, frightened, but alive. The state police found him exactly where I'd said he'd be, handcuffed in the cabin's basement, guarded by a hired thug who surrendered without a fight when confronted by armed officers. I met Ronnie at the hospital that evening. When I walked into his room and saw him, bruised, bandaged, but safe, I finally let myself cry. "Mom." His voice was hoarse. He tried to sit up, wincing. "I'm sorry. I tried to warn you, but they grabbed me before." "Hush." I took his hand, careful of the IV line. "You have nothing to apologize for. You tried to do the right thing. That's more than most of us can say. I found out about Dad months ago. I couldn't believe it at first. I kept thinking there had to be an explanation. Some way it wasn't as bad as it looked." His eyes filled with tears. But it was worse. Everything we had, everything we were, it was all built on lies and stolen money. I know. Trevor knew. He's known for years. And he didn't care. He just wanted his share. Ronnie's voice broke. "I thought we were brothers. I thought family meant something." I squeezed his hand. Family means different things to different people. Trevor learned from his father that family was about legacy and wealth. You learned something else. That integrity matters more than money. We don't get to choose what our parents teach us, but we do get to choose what we become. What happens now? Now? I smoothed his hair back, the same gesture I'd used when he was small and frightened. Now we tell the truth, all of it, and we let justice run its course. The investigation that followed was exhaustive and brutal. Diana negotiated immunity for me in exchange for full cooperation and testimony. My name on those documents, she argued, was the result of coercion and deliberate deception. Alexander had made me complicit without my knowledge or consent. The prosecutors agreed, especially after hearing the recordings and reading Alexander's confession letter. Ronnie received immunity as well, his role as whistleblower protecting him from any charges related to his initial silence about his father's crimes. Trevor, Castellano, and Pemberton weren't as fortunate. The trial took place 8 months later. I sat in the courtroom every day, watching as prosecutors systematically dismantled the empire Alexander had built. Witness after witness testified to bribes paid, inspections falsified, contracts rigged. The forensic accountants traced every dollar, every transaction, building an undeniable picture of organized corruption that had infiltrated county government for over 2 decades. Trevor maintained his innocence, claiming he'd believed everything was legitimate, that his father had assured him the business was clean. The jury didn't believe him. The recordings of his threats against Ronnie, his admission of kidnapping, his assault captured on my hidden recorder, all of it painted a picture of a man who'd known exactly what he was doing and had chosen profit over principle. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Castellano received 15 years. Pemberton, who cooperated late in the investigation, received 8 years and disbarment. Victoria, who'd claimed ignorance of the criminal activities despite living off the proceeds, avoided prison but lost everything in the civil forfeiture proceedings. Last I heard, she was working as a paralegal in Boston, using her maiden name. The hardest part wasn't the trial or the media attention, or even the public dissection of my 43-year marriage. The hardest part was visiting Trevor in prison. I went once, 3 months after his sentencing. He refused to see me at first, but I persisted, and eventually he agreed. He looked older, smaller somehow, in his prison uniform. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that might have been shame, or might have been just self-pity. "Why did you come?" he asked, not meeting my eyes. "Because you're still my son. I tried to have you declared incompetent. I kidnapped Ronnie. I threatened to kill him. Kill you. And you're here because I'm your son?" Bitterness dripped from every word. "Yes, because unlike you and your father, I believe family means something beyond money and power." I leaned forward. "Trevor, I'm not here to forgive you. What you did was unforgivable. But I am here to tell you that when you get out, if you choose to become someone different, someone better, I'll help you try." "Why would you do that?" "Because someone has to break this cycle. Alexander taught you that love was conditional, that family was a transaction, that the only thing that mattered was wealth and success. I let him teach you that because I was too afraid to challenge him, too comfortable in my ignorance. That's my failure. You didn't do anything wrong. I did everything wrong. I chose comfort over truth. I accepted a role that kept me powerless because it was easier than fighting for agency. I modeled weakness when I should have modeled strength. You learned from both of us, from his corruption and my passivity. I stood. I can't change the past, but I can try to be different now. And if you ever want to try too, I'll be there. I left before he could respond, before the tears I'd been holding back could fall. Outside the prison, Helen waited in her car. She'd been my constant companion through everything: the investigation, the trial, the aftermath. My sister, who'd proven that family could mean loyalty and support instead of manipulation and betrayal. "How was it?" she asked as I climbed into the passenger seat. "Painful. Necessary." I buckled my seatbelt. "Take me home." Home. The house at 47 Maple Street was still mine, though everything else had been forfeited to the government. The millions Alexander had stolen were being returned to the county, used to repair roads and fund schools and rebuild the infrastructure his corruption had undermined. I lived on Social Security and a small pension from the county. They'd agreed that Alexander's legitimate earnings, minimal as they were, could be paid to his widow. It was enough. Barely, but enough. Ronnie had moved back to Vermont after everything settled, taking a position at a nonprofit that fought government corruption. He visited weekly, slowly healing from the physical and emotional trauma of his kidnapping. We were rebuilding our relationship, learning to talk openly about things we'd never discussed before. Sometimes he asked about his father, trying to reconcile the man who'd taught him to ride a bike with the man who'd stolen millions and planned to sacrifice him to protect the secret. "People are complicated," I'd tell him. "Your father loved you, in his way, but he loved money and power more. That was his choice. His failure. It doesn't define you." "What about Trevor? Do you think he'll ever change?" "I don't know, but I have to believe people can change. Or what's the point of any of this?" The house felt different now. I'd removed most of Alexander's belongings, donated his clothes, converted his study into a sewing room. The basement, that secret office where he'd plotted and planned, I'd had completely renovated. Now it was a bright guest room where Ronnie stayed when he visited, all traces of its dark history erased. I'd thought about selling, starting fresh somewhere new, but this house, despite everything, was still the place where I'd raised my children, where I'd learned to cook and garden, where I'd built a life even if that life had been built on a foundation of lies. I was reclaiming it, making it mine in a way it had never been before. Helen helped me plant a garden that spring. Vegetables and flowers, things that required patience and care and daily attention. We spent hours on our hands and knees in the dirt, two old women rebuilding something from nothing. "Do you ever regret it?" Helen asked one afternoon as we worked. "Exposing everything? You could have taken the settlement, kept the house and the money, lived comfortably. Ronnie would have been released eventually. Would he? Or would they have killed him once they felt secure?" I sat back on my heels, wiping sweat from my forehead. "No, I don't regret it. For the first time in my life, I made a choice based on what was right instead of what was easy. That's worth more than any amount of money. You've changed. I've finally become who I should have been all along." I looked at the house, at the garden taking shape, at the life I was building on my own terms. Alexander spent 43 years trying to keep me small, manageable, ignorant. He thought he was protecting me. Really, he was controlling me. And I let him because I thought that was what wives did. We deferred, we trusted, we stayed in our lanes. And now? Now I know better. Age isn't weakness. Experience isn't irrelevance. All those years of managing a household, of raising children, of navigating family dynamics, those were skills. I was learning and growing and becoming capable, even while Alexander tried to convince me I was helpless without him. Helen smiled. "You know what the newspapers called you? The widow who brought down Vermont's biggest corruption scandal in 50 years. There's talk of a book. I'm not interested in fame. What are you interested in?" I considered the question, looking at my dirt-stained hands, at the house I was reclaiming, at the future stretching before me. "Peace," purpose. Maybe helping other women who find themselves where I was, trapped in comfortable lies, afraid to ask questions, believing their ignorance is safety. You could do that. Start a support group, maybe. Or volunteer with the domestic violence shelter. Financial abuse is abuse. It was a good idea. I'd spent 67 years being Alexander's wife, Trevor's mother, the woman defined by her relationships to others. Maybe it was time to be just Margaret, a woman who'd survived betrayal and found strength in her survival. The doorbell rang late that afternoon. I opened it to find a young woman, maybe 30, nervous and hesitant. "Mrs. Hines? I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Jessica Thornton. My husband. I think he's hiding money from me. I think there are accounts I don't know about, properties and other names. But everyone says I'm being paranoid, that I should trust him, that I'm just stressed." Tears filled her eyes. "I read about your case, about how you found the truth. I was hoping, could you tell me how you did it? How you knew to look?" I invited her in, made tea, listened to her story. It was familiar, too familiar. The husband who handled all the finances, the dismissive responses to questions, the gradually dawning suspicion that something was wrong. "Trust your instincts," I told her. "If something feels wrong, it probably is. And don't let anyone convince you that asking questions makes you a bad wife. Wanting truth makes you a smart woman." I gave her Diana Sutherland's number, Patricia Reeves's contact information, the names of the investigators who'd helped me. I armed her with resources and validation, and the knowledge that she wasn't crazy or paranoid or ungrateful. She left an hour later, standing taller, her shoulders back, ready to fight for her own truth. After she'd gone, I stood on my porch watching the sun set over Pine Ridge. This town had been Alexander's kingdom, the place he'd built his corrupt empire. Now it was rebuilding, recovering, learning to function without the rot he'd introduced. And I was rebuilding too. Helen joined me on the porch, handing me a glass of wine. We sat in the swing Alexander had installed, rocking gently in the evening breeze. "Do you think Trevor will take you up on your offer?" Helen asked. "When he gets out? I don't know. But I had to make it. For my sake as much as his. I can't carry hate around for 12 years. It's too heavy. You're more forgiving than I'd be." "I'm not forgiving. I'm releasing. There's a difference." I sipped the wine. "Trevor made his choices. He'll pay for them. But I refuse to let his choices define the rest of my life." Ronnie arrived for dinner that evening, bringing fresh bread from the bakery and stories about his work. We ate at the kitchen table, the three of us, talking and laughing and building new memories to replace the poisoned ones. This was family now. Not the picture-perfect image Alexander had insisted on projecting to the world. Not the wealthy, successful highness with their beautiful home and their secrets. Just three people who'd survived disaster and chosen to move forward together. "I have news," Ronnie said as we cleared the dishes. "The nonprofit is expanding. They want to open a branch focused specifically on helping families affected by financial corruption. They've asked me to direct it." "That's wonderful. And they want to name it after someone who exemplifies the courage to expose corruption despite personal cost." He smiled. "They want to call it the Margaret Hines Center for Family Financial Justice." I froze, dish in hand. "No, absolutely not. I didn't do this for recognition, but you could help so many people. Your story could inspire others to come forward, to fight back against manipulation and control." Ronnie took the dish from my hand. "You said earlier that you wanted purpose. This could be it. Let your experience mean something beyond just our family." Helen nodded. "He's right. You could make a real difference." I thought about Jessica Thornton, about the fear in her eyes that I recognized because I'd felt it myself, about all the other women and men trapped in situations where they suspected betrayal, but lacked the courage or resources to pursue the truth. "Okay," I said finally, "but on one condition. The center doesn't just help people expose corruption. It helps them rebuild afterward. Because winning the truth doesn't mean much if you're left broken and alone." Agreed. That night, I stood in what had been Alexander's study and was now my sewing room. I'd kept one photo of him, taken 20 years ago, before the corruption had consumed everything, before the lies had become so layered we'd lost sight of truth. He looked happy in the photo, young, hopeful, in love with the woman he'd just married. When had it changed? When had he decided that money mattered more than integrity? When had he looked at me and decided I was someone to manage rather than a partner to trust? I'd never know. But I'd stopped torturing myself trying to understand. "You almost destroyed us," I said to the photo. "Your greed, your fear, your need for control. You almost took everything that mattered and left us with nothing but shame and secrets." I placed the photo face down in the drawer. "But you didn't win. We survived. And we're building something better from the ruins you left behind. Not wealth, not empire, just truth and family, and the knowledge that we're stronger than you ever gave us credit for." I closed the drawer, turned off the light, and went downstairs where Helen and Ronnie waited, where laughter and conversation and real love, not the performance of it, but the honest, complicated reality, filled my home. Outside, November wind rattled the windows. Inside, I was warm. I was 67 years old. I'd lost 43 years to a lie, but I had years left, years to live honestly, to help others, to be the woman I'd always had the capacity to become, but had been too afraid to claim. Alexander had underestimated me. Trevor had underestimated me. Even I had underestimated myself. Never again. Age was not weakness. Experience was not irrelevance. And a woman who'd survived 67 years of joy and betrayal, who'd raised children and buried husbands and exposed corruption, was not someone to be dismissed or controlled or underestimated. I was Marie Hines, and I was just beginning. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.